Qaradawi. He is a man who's actually seen by many as controversial, but he is a man who supported the protests and the revolts as they were ongoing. He did speak to the revolutionary youth at the time and actually had some very harsh and maybe even personal words against former President Hosni Mubarak. Now, the revolutionary youth say they got him here. They invite him to lead this first prayer after the fall of the former regime in recognition of his support. I mean, his call is seen by many as has prompted many other people, maybe more religious people, to join the protests here on Liberation Square. Now, he did call for the unity of Egyptians. He said that Egypt was a land of the cross and the crescent. He did also sort of put on the spot, but in a mild way, the army, reminding the army that the protests were about bringing a civilian rule to the country. And he also told Egyptians to now go back to work, that rebuilding is needed, and probably a sort of also mild call for people to stop striking and give the army a chance at the moment, at least.
Okay, Hada, this is being called the Friday of Victory. We're seeing tens of thousands gathered there behind you. But from what we heard earlier, there are also rallies, or at least one rally in Cairo in support of the Mubarak regime. What can you tell us about that?
Well, certainly there are people who maybe do not feel do not support fully the ousted president, but there are people who do not like the way he was ousted. There are people who thought that he had pledged that he would leave his role as a president in 7 months when the presidential elections are supposed to be held. And there are people who thought that he should be given a chance, at least until then. I don't think they are the majority at all. I mean, if you look here at Liberation Square, it's been more packed than it's ever been throughout the 18 days of protests. You can't see it on the camera, but all the side streets are completely packed with people. So certainly there is a bit of a division of opinion, but I think overwhelmingly, at least from the conversations I had over the past few days, many Egyptians thought that 30 years were way too long. Many Egyptians thought that the corruption had gone completely out of control, especially since Gamal Mubarak started rising within the ranks of the National Democratic Party. That's the ruling party. So I don't know as much is it support for the president or maybe disagreement on how he was ousted.
Okay, thank you very much, Hoda Abdelhamid in Cairo there. In Bahrain, meanwhile, the country's top Shia cleric has called Thursday's deadly police attack on protesters there a massacre. Ayatollah Sheikh Isa Qasim told worshippers gathered for Friday prayers the government's actions had, quote, shut the door to dialogue. Meanwhile, funerals are being held for the victims of Thursday's violence. Mourners at one funeral call for an end to the country's ruling monarchy. The military remains on the streets of the capital, Manama. Our correspondent, who for security reasons we're not naming, saw the aftermath firsthand, and he joins us right now live to tell us about what's been happening in Manama. Do tell us about what's been happening in the last few hours, what you're seeing in the Bahraini capital.
Well, you're seeing those pictures of the funeral marches that took place in Sitra, the island of Sitra, where 3 of the dead people come from. There were thousands of people there. The last of those 3 funerals is taking place as we speak. Also, of course, it is Friday here, Friday prayers taking place across Bahrain. I was in the large village of Draz, where Ayatollah Isa Qasim, who's the best-known Shia cleric here in Bahrain, was speaking. He said that it was a massacre that had been perpetrated by the Bahraini authorities. He said it was designed to split the Sunnis and Shias of this country to create a sectarian divide. But he said that his supporters and the opponents of the government should not themselves use violence. He said violence is the way of the government, it's the way of the cowards.
As we speak, we just saw earlier pictures from state television in Bahrain showing a pro-government rally More can you tell us about that particular rally? These are the pictures, once again, from state television of a pro-government rally taking place this Friday in Manama.
Yes, there is a pro-government rally, and there have been pro-government supporters taking to the streets. In fact, I saw some here late on Thursday as well, celebrating almost as though they'd won a football match. It looked like a football celebration. Of course, this is an occasion or a time when people have died and many people have been injured. And what's interesting about this demonstration is that this is a pro-government demonstration, even though the government itself has banned demonstrations. The military has said large gatherings will not be tolerated, yet government supporters seem not to be stopped. With regard to the funeral marches, no sign of the police there or at Friday prayers. They seem to be avoiding those occasions, but keeping a very watchful eye. Helicopters flying overhead, and there are still police units very visible on many of the roads and intersections across Bahrain.
Now, you attended, as you said, the funerals earlier today. Do you get a sense that there is still a resolve among the anti-government protesters to continue with their action?
There's a mix of feelings of those protesters. There's certainly anger, there's certainly grief. Many of them say they will continue their protest. But I think, to be honest, there's also fear. They've seen what has happened, and even at those funeral marches, many people said they were somewhat reticent about being there because they don't know how the government is going to respond. Remember, just a few days ago, there was a funeral march carrying a body, very much like these funeral marches, and it was stopped by the police, who used tear gas, who opened fire with rubber bullets, with this bird shot, which sprays pellets at protesters. And on that occasion, one man died. So you can see why people are afraid.
OK, thank you very much. Our correspondent there in Manama bringing us up to date there with the latest in Bahrain. In Libya, there have been a string of protests against longtime leader Muammar Gaddafi. Soldiers have been deployed in the country's second largest city, Benghazi, after thousands took to the streets there overnight. There have been reports of confrontations between pro-democracy and security forces in the eastern city of Al-Baida. There have also been calls for protests in the port city of Tobruk on Friday. Mass demonstrations haven't spread to the capital, Tripoli, but organisers are urging people to take to the streets there after Friday prayers. Now, Muammar Gaddafi was out on the streets of Tripoli later on Thursday rallying supporters. But as Caroline Malone reports, there have been many online videos. We can't independently verify them, but they purport to show events during the Day of Rage.
Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi has been out on the streets of the capital Tripoli with his supporters, as many other cities see anti-government protests. These are images from state TV, with people shouting slogans such as, "We do not want any other leader but Gaddafi." It's quite a contrast to the footage seen on the internet of anti-government demonstrations. A gunshot is heard, and a man who appears fatally injured is seen lying on the road.